Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Friday, April the 7th, 2023. Good Friday this year. Although this morning we're going to talk about yesterday, last night, and Monday, Thursday. The reading was from Matthew 26, and I'll read some selected verses, beginning at verse 17. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" And so the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never drink again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. What this passage reminds us, of course, is that what we know as the Last Supper, which then set the precedent and the pattern for the Lord's Supper or Holy Communion, or the Eucharist, whatever way, the sacrament of the altar, whatever terms we want to use to describe it, was really began with a Passover meal, the final Passover meal that Jesus shared with his disciples during what we now call Holy Week, just as he was about to be betrayed by Judas. I left that part of the reading out. Betrayed by Jesus, arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, tried with trumped up charges, and ultimately sentenced to death. But again, the patterns it's important for us to keep in mind that this all stemmed from, it was a reinterpretation, I guess you'd say, of the Passover Seder. And so last evening we had Deb Crawford's husband Jay, and then also Jill, talk about what the Passover was, coming from a Jewish background. And they shared with us that, of course, Passover remembers the biblical story of the Exodus, where God freed the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. The holiday is often celebrated for 8 days and incorporates the themes of springtime, a Jewish homeland, family, remembrance of Jewish history, social justice, and freedom, all wrapped into one. And all these aspects are discussed and symbolically represented during the Passover Seder. Of course, the story was that the Pharaoh was fearful that there'd be too many Jews living in Egypt, so he made them slaves, then even demanded at one point that the male Jewish babies be killed. The infant Jesus, of course, was saved by his mother, who put him in a basket down in the Nile River, where he was found and adopted by none other than the Pharaoh's daughter. Years later, Moses killed a slave master, fled into the desert, where he encountered a burning bush of God revealing himself to Moses and telling Moses to go back to Egypt and go to Pharaoh and lead the people out of slavery. And so Moses went to Pharaoh and asked that he let the Jews go free from Egypt. But each time, of course, the Pharaoh said no. And so God sent plagues, a total of 10 plagues. The 10th and final plague, of course, was the most drastic one, the killing of the firstborn by the so-called angel of death. But in order to protect their own firstborn children, the Israelites marked their doors with lamb's blood, so the angel of death would pass over them, hence the name Passover. And thus, again, the name Passover is that moment. And the Israelites ultimately then were freed from slavery and wandered in the desert for some 40 years before they reached the Promised Land. And the Seder plate, as we learned, has certain foods that are all symbolic of some aspect of the Passover. So a roasted shank bone represents the sacrificial lamb. An egg represents spring and the circle of life. Bitter herbs of horseradish represent the bitterness of slavery. An applesauce-like mixture with wine nuts and apples represents the brick mortar used by the Jewish slaves to build Egypt. parsley to represent spring, romaine lettuce. The Jewish stay in Egypt began soft and ended hard like the lettuce leaf. And finally, matzah, or unleavened bread. Also placed on the table are 3 pieces of matzah, a cracker-like unleavened bread that represent the bread the Israelites took with them when they fled Egypt. And salt water to represent the tears of the slaves. And there was a specific wine glass or kiddush cup. The Torah commands at least 4 symbolic cups of wine to be consumed during the Passover Seder. And the bread is the bread of affliction that they ate in the land of Egypt. And it was unleavened because they were to prepare it quickly in order to leave once that 10 plague had taken place and the Pharaoh finally allowed them to leave slavery in Egypt. And then during the Seder, each adult diner drinks, again, 4 cups of wine representing the redemption of the Israelites from slavery under the Egyptians. And of course, what Jesus did is he said, in essence, I am the Passover lamb. I am the sacrificial lamb. The bread that he took, this is my body. The wine that he poured, this is my blood, that they would be given and shed for them, to free them, not simply from slavery in Egypt, but from sin, from death, from evil itself. And so the Passover, the Last Supper, was a reinterpretation, again, of the Passover Seder, that last Passover Seder that Jesus shared with his disciples, a meal that, as it became reinterpreted, is something that, just as the Jews continue to celebrate Passover each and every year, we remember and celebrate, especially on Maundy, Thursday, but each and every Sunday, the Lord's Supper. And finally, tomorrow we'll talk about Good Friday as we finish our journey through Holy Week and end our journey through Lent before Easter morning that we'll celebrate on Sunday. So until then, take care. Hope that you can join me again tomorrow, and then especially on Sunday morning as well. Until then, take care. Bye.